At Palo Alto Medical Foundation in Mountain View and a physician on staff at El Camino Hospital. Been practicing for more decades than I like to admit. And I met Claude at the College of the Redwoods. I was there for a summer class. And we're both from the province of Quebec, Montreal, so we hit it off and we've been having sort of weekly or every couple of months coffee clatches. And he said there was a need for the talk on dust toxicity, and we got into the conversation, and it seems there's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there, and if you go on the internet, you'll find a lot of information that is not based on evidence. And I have to deal with this every single day. Baby boomers is cancer. Are we going to get cancer? Is what we're exposed to causing cancer? And I think there's information out there on the web that wood dust cause cancer. So I looked it up, and there's a recent report, 2011, from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Toxicology, called the Report on Carcinogens. It's like a 500-page tome. And in there is not but 2 pages on wood dust. And there is zero evidence that wood dust causes lung cancer. It does not. There's no connection. There's only one association between wood dust and cancer, and that's cancer of the nasopharynx up in here. So it's the nose and the sinuses and maybe the back of the throat. Because when you inhale these wood dust particles, the larger particles get filtered out by your nose, the mucus, the hairs, and they get trapped in there. And different papers I read very consistently say there's a 5 to 45-fold increase in cancer of the nasopharynx. Cancer of the nasopharynx is something I was familiar with as one of the more common diseases of children. You know, children have a 1 in 1,000 incidence of cancer. Sort of shocking, but it's that much. And in them and in many people, the nasopharyngeal cancer seems to be associated with the herpes virus. That seems to be one of the predisposing factors. But in us, it's wood dust, and there was no specific wood dust that they incriminated. It was just wood dust in general is associated with nasopharyngeal cancer. And a lot of these studies are occupational workers, not hobbyists. There's very little evidence that being a hobby woodworker causes any sort of toxicity. Be that as it may, as an asthmatic, I know my lungs, one of the definitions of asthma is a hyperreactivity. I react to cold air. Growing up in Montreal wasn't fun in the winter because I would wheeze at night. Laughing sets it off. Perfume sets it off. And I think the red cedar really did. So if you look at the literature, again, the question is, if you keep getting exposed to these dusts, will they create an asthmatic situation? And it's very hard to find that evidence that it's true. It may be for western red cedar, but other woods, it's not at all clear. The woods are irritants. They will set me off. And looking at the literature, I could find reactions to pine, to oak, to many of our exotic hardwoods. But those are reactions in people who have pre-existing hyperreactive airways, asthma, not de novo. You know, reading on the web said there's 2 kinds of people: those who are allergic to cocobolo and those who become allergic to cocobolo. But cocobolo is not one of the woods that has ever bothered me. I turn it, I cut it, and I don't react to it. So you have to be very careful about what you read. I then went and looked at the report from the U.S. Lung Association on occupational lung diseases. I apologize for not bringing PowerPoint slides. I don't like PowerPoint. I don't know how many of you are engineers here, but there was an article a few years back titled "PowerPoint is Evil." And the implication of the article was that PowerPoint contributed to the crash of the shuttle launch. Because, when they presented data to the engineers, they did it in PowerPoint, which is, our grade 3 kids use PowerPoint. It's not a scientific kind of product. It's for marketing, it's for other things, but you get very small sound bites in PowerPoint. But I printed out a couple of things, and if you look at the occupational lung diseases listed by the American Lung Association, not a single one is wood. Not one. It's farmer's lung, bird breeder's lung, paprika splitter's lung, malt worker's lung. These are hypersensitivity reactions to mold and to antigens that are in these products. So yes, mold is a concern. You have spalted maple, you have moldy redwood, that can cause serious reactions. I'll give you an example, not about wood, but my medical assistant nurse, her father is from Latvia, and he's a very frugal Latvian. He was a bird breeder, and he would have his birds in the cage, and then when he had to clean out the bottom, he would go outside, throw it in the air, have the poop fly off, and keep the other stuff and put it back in. And 6-7 years ago, he came into the hospital short of breath, coughing, wheezing, with a high fever. And the pulmonary doc was smart enough to figure out this was a hypersensitivity. He didn't have standard infectious pneumonia. He had a hypersensitivity reaction to the antigens from the bird feces. And they gave him prednisone, a very strong anti-inflammatory, and he got better. And those are the kinds of things we see with moldy dusts. There's even a word, sequoiosis from redwood mold that causes reactions in the lungs. So I think we have to be careful about irritants, whether a wood is really a sensitizer or not. One of my favorite woods is Pacific yew. Pacific yew is a little short evergreen tree. And in the 1970s, the government wanted to find more drugs to fight cancer. And so they studied 100,000 trees and plants. And of that whole battery, they came up with one single drug that helped treat cancer, and that was Taxol. Taxol is an amazing drug at treating ovarian cancer and now a number of other cancers. And it comes from the bark of the Pacific yew. Mm-hmm. But at that time, they had to take 40 trees to get enough bark to make a gram. And they finally were able to synthesize it. And then after all that work, the government gave the patent to some pharmaceutical company who's making millions, not the government. So I love Pacific yew. It's a softwood that's very dense and hard and turns well. But I know there's an agent in there that could be related to Taxol, the chemotherapy agent. So I said to myself, maybe I should turn this and not use a mask, and I'll get a little chemotherapy light. It'll protect me. The fallacy with that thinking is that most chemotherapy drugs are in themselves carcinogens. If you have cancer, you immediately have a higher risk for a second cancer because your body has allowed that to develop. Then when we as physicians give you chemotherapy drugs or radiation, they themselves can increase your risk down the road for other cancers. And those are bad cancers that are much harder to treat, like leukemia and sarcoma. So I'm very careful with my Pacific yew now, and I wear products that will protect me. I have this little mask from Ace Hardware. It's an N95 mask. And I didn't know this, but I went and looked it up. N95 means it will take out 95% of particulate matter. And the N means it's not resistant to oil. So they have N95, N99, N100. And we use these in medicine to protect us last year and the year before from swine flu, the H1N1 virus. Now that virus is 1/10 of a micron in size. A micron is not a visible size. Our hair, 80 to 120 microns. So it's 100 times smaller than a diameter of a hair is 1 micron, and these viruses are 1/10 of that. But these have filters, and when I asked for a fresh one, my nurse brought me an N95 mask that didn't look at all like what I was expecting. The problem with these masks is, yes, they filter down to 1/10 of a micron, or you wouldn't be protected against the virus. But if you look at my mask, it's kind of old and dangly. And this may filter, but if it's not snug here, you haven't got much protection. So the fit of this is more important than just how effective it is. You have to have it snug and without any leaks for you to cut out all those particulate matter or cut down to that small size. So particles that are 5 micron get trapped in the nose. You have to be less than 5 micron to get down into the lung. And so it's those larger particles that seem to cause the problem. I still don't want to inhale all this stuff. 1, because it'll set off my asthma, and 2, because I don't think we have enough time and studies to prove it. So, even though the evidence is not there, I still think we ought to all protect ourselves. So I now have my dust extractor, my central vacuum that goes down to 2 microns. I have, one of the studies said, I used to free sand. I used to take boards outside and put my sander on there, disconnect the vacuum hose, and just out in the environment do that. And if you attach that vacuum hose, the studies say you decrease the particulate matter 300-fold. But there's still enough in there that you need additional protection. So I now have my masks, and I have one of those hoods that has the filter and the airflow to keep me out of trouble. I'm not advocating because there's no evidence you should go and do this without a mask. I just think, medical evidence changes. For 20 years, we would give women estrogens after menopause because they felt better, they didn't get hot flashes, and now we know there's a significant increased risk of breast cancer from those estrogens. So data changes. The quality of the evidence changes. If you have a drug and you want to test it, and that drug company sponsors your study, that's immediately tainted. I think physicians are honest and do the right thing, but if you're getting $100,000 from the drug company to test their drug, you may insert some little bias there that you may not be aware of. So we all have to take this evidence with a grain of salt.
Yeah, you used a term I've never heard, and that's redwood mold. I never heard of that.
Oh, just moldy redwood. Not, I think many woods can become moldy, sit around, get wet, and have mold on them. The term, yeah. So.
Why? What's so good about redwood growing mold? I mean,
no, just that it causes disease that I hadn't heard of called, Sequoia gigantea, sequoiosis. Yes. Is a lung condition from moldy redwood.
A lot of our redwood forests are very damp because they're in the fog belt, and so a lot of the wood does develop a lot of mold. And you go to Home Depot and you look at fence boards and you dig down in the middle of the pile where they're damp still, and you'll see some moldy fence boards in there.
Yeah, cellulose is, of course, what's made out of. Has there been any studies done about cellulose toxicity and carcinogen-related issues?
Not that I found. This data is available on the web to everybody. So when I do medical research, I go to a place called PubMed. PubMed is the National Library of Medicine online. 50 years of medical research that's searchable, and a lot of it is available in sort of lay terms too. So I searched for occupational lung disease, wood dust toxicity, wood reactions, and came out with pages and pages of result, none of which showed causing asthma, causing cancer. Cellulose I didn't search for. I would assume it's more inert and less reactive, but don't know that. That's an assumption.
I've heard that diseases like silicosis and asbestosis can take 20, 30 years to show up sometimes, and so I wondered if there were properties, the physical property of that lodging in the lung, that there might be similarities with wood chemistry.
That's right, and I'm not sure why asbestosis and silicosis cause as much damage as they do, and so far wood hasn't, because there's lots of people who work in sawmills and have been exposed, and the Norwegians have done studies on millions of people. But so far, not yet. I'm not sure I want to keep exposing myself waiting for that answer to come. If you go to the U.S. American Lung Association and look at these occupational lungs, they have pictures of the X-rays. In my 40 years in medicine, I've never seen a reaction to wood, not once.